It was one of the worst bicycle crashes in state history. 2 cyclists were killed, 17 others seriously injured. Now, 2 years later, the driver who caused that crash is sentenced on misdemeanor charges. Why some of the victims say the system failed them.
Taking you behind the investigation. This is the Arizona's Family Investigates podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. Cody, Lillich, and I have worked together on this story. We have been following it since the Maricopa County Attorney's Office dropped the charges, sending the case back to Goodyear Police.
Yeah, and we've been following this really since that horrible weekend, and we should walk you through the details of what happened on that weekend in February of 2023, February 25th to be exact. It was a weekly ride by the West Valley Cycle Group. They were out going in a rural area of Maricopa County. This was such a major case when it happened, it ended up being investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board. That's not something that usually occurs on an everyday crash, but one of this magnitude, they do get involved. And in their report, they found that a pickup truck had drifted from the left 2 lanes of the road into a vacant right lane on the Cotton Lane Bridge in rural Maricopa County, hitting the concrete barrier that separates the road from the sidewalk, coming off that wall, and then struck those cyclists really from behind. So not even from the side, really came from behind. And, you know, as you're cycling, you wouldn't even see it.
Yeah, and to speak to some of these cyclists who were a part of this, I mean, they were just really caught off guard. There was some helmet camera of the scene. It was just really hard to see because there were just mangled bicycles all over the road, all of these cyclists on the ground, and it took a few minutes for first responders to get on scene.
And when this was initially paged out that weekend, it was as a mass casualty incident because as the NTSB report laid out and diagrammed out, the truck literally just plowed into this group of cyclists. So, and they were biking in an organized group. Most of them were, you know, one riding right next to the other and in a line all the way back. So, I mean, it was very visible how they were riding across that bridge that morning.
Yeah, and it was really sort of surprising to speak to some of these cyclists because they had mapped out this route because there were bike lanes here. This was a wider stretch of road, so they felt safe in this area.
Yeah, it is considered a rural part of Maricopa County, but it is a newer style bridge. So this isn't, you know, some kind of country bridge. It is a newer construction of a bridge. I'm not sure of the exact date, but it's a big concrete structure with well identified lanes. And so, you know, the group thought that it would be a safe route to take for their weekly ride.
Yeah, now the driver, later identified as Pedro Quintana-Lujan, told police his steering wheel locked up, but that NTSB report noted that 2 separate tests found nothing wrong with the steering wheel. Another possible factor, Quintana-Lujan was found with THC in his system. A drug recognition expert, or DRE, responded to the scene but couldn't definitively determine that he was impaired.
And so you've reported on DREs and these drug recognition experts. I guess give our listeners a little bit of insight into what that is. I mean, it's a law enforcement officer, essentially.
It is. And this is sort of the gold standard for how they identify someone under the influence. It's a lot easier with alcohol because they can do a blood draw or there's the breathalyzer, but for drugs, it becomes a little bit more complicated. And so we actually got to see some of this training firsthand, which is weeks of training. They have to study up. There's a certain curriculum associated with it. Depending who you talk to, it is considered the gold standard. There are some defense attorneys who argue, hey, there's no real science behind this because it's really being trained on identifying certain symptoms that a driver might display that lead you to believe that they might be under the influence of specific types of drugs.
Yeah, you had a very interesting story showing that training. I believe it was officers from Washington who were here in the Valley training on how to bring that back to their state. So interesting if people would like to go and watch that story again. But Goodyear Police initially charged Pedro Quintana-Lujan with 2 counts of manslaughter, 3 counts of aggravated assault, 18 counts of endangerment, and 2 counts of causing serious bodily injury or death by a moving vehicle. But the Maricopa County Attorney's Office dismissed those charges. They asked police for more information, essentially saying that the case wasn't strong enough that was presented to them.
And it was really surprising to a lot of these cyclists at the time because they felt like Goodyear Police had done a good job of determining the specifics of what had happened, laying it all out, and then the county attorney's office came back and said, hey, we need more information. Goodyear Police continued to investigate and then resubmitted the case. Then in November, that's when the county attorney's office called the victims of the crash and the families of those killed to their office. They said they could not prove recklessness. The driver was not impaired by drugs or alcohol. And in a statement to us, the county attorney's office said they wouldn't be pursuing felony charges because there was no reasonable likelihood of conviction. They sent the case then to city prosecutors in Goodyear for misdemeanor charges.
And so that's was the latest hurdle for this case, was to get over, not having this in the Superior Court system and a felony charge possibly, but going now the misdemeanor route. And so that was the cyclists' push for justice, as much justice as they could get, instead of going through the Superior Court and felonies, now misdemeanor, and the punishment for that much less serious than what a judge in a Superior Court case can hand down.
Exactly. And, they felt, especially when the NTSB report came out, Maricopa County Attorney's Office stood by their decision to not pursue felony charges, but they felt that report really indicated, that the driver had, really was responsible for what had happened. Even the city prosecutor at the sentencing had pointed out there was 6 seconds where the driver could have stopped, could have swerved a different way, and the driver did not react. And we'll never know why he didn't, but they felt like for those 6 seconds that forever changed so many lives, there should have been felony charges.
And the disconnect seems to be between the NTSB report and the reason and the statement that we were given by the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, because given what the suspect, he's now been convicted, Pedro Quintana-Lujan said, is that his steering wheel locked up. Well, the NTSB report, independent set of investigators they used what the police gathered on scene, because of course they weren't there immediately, but they got all of the investigative materials from Goodyear Police, and also they sent off the truck mechanics and diagnostics, because everything's electronic now. So sent all that off for testing. They even sent the truck itself. I believe it was for 2 separate tests. One was through the Department of Public Safety here, and they had another independent test done. But there was no evidence that the NTSB could find that showed that truck that was involved in that accident had a steering wheel that locked up, or any other mechanical issue that would have caused this crash. So, that was the biggest disconnect that we still don't have an answer on, is what was it about Goodyear Police's case that there was not enough to bring it to Superior Court trial, but the NTSB had enough to have plenty of evidence in their public docket to point that everything that Pedro Quintana-Lujan said wasn't true.
And I think, several of these cyclists retained an attorney, and in speaking to some of these attorneys that handle these cases, there really is the perception out there, they say, among prosecutors, that there are a lot of drivers who are going to sit on juries who just do not support cyclists, and they feel that these cases are really hard to win. And so there's the perception that they're not pursuing this because if you can't win, why try? But, there's so many cyclists out there on the roads. And I was told Goodyear Police, their investigation was really in depth. The lead investigator was an avid cyclist himself. So he really took pride in this investigation. So there is still a lot of anger at the county attorney's office for not pursuing the case.
And we never heard directly from them other than statements about, any more detail on why this wasn't pursued, just that one statement, correct?
Right. And I did speak with a former prosecutor in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office when we did sort of an in-depth story on this, and they pointed out that there wasn't clear-cut recklessness here. The driver, while he didn't push, try to brake or, veer out of the way, he wasn't speeding and there wasn't that impairment. And so recklessness was very hard to prove. The defense attorneys would argue, hey, this guy was hit a wall. He was coming off the barrier when he struck these cyclists. There was time for him to stop. So they would dispute that. But that's what it came down to, that idea of recklessness.
And as far as the cyclists are concerned, they don't think that there's equal justice for, say, if this were to be a car versus pedestrian or car versus another car. They don't see it as being an even justice system, do they?
Not at all. Not at all. They say, in fact, that there are often these cases end up or result in a plea deal, that they sort of take what they're given and that they don't move forward with these and pursue them to the full extent. And so there really is this frustration. And then there's the perspective in Arizona, there's not vehicular homicide or vehicular manslaughter charges. And so they feel like maybe if that were the case, there might be something different.
So the charges that they were ultimately left with, that Goodyear city prosecutors decided they were going to take this, they have enough to go through municipal court, was 12 counts for either causing death or injury by a moving violation. The driver, Pedro Quintana-Lujan, tried to fight the charges, but in August, as a part of a plea deal, and as you just mentioned, plea deal, admitted to guilt in the crash, agreeing to spend between 6 months and a year behind bars. And we just wrapped up with sentencing.
Exactly right. And those injured and family members of those killed spoke out. Stephen Melissa talked about his wife, Karen, an avid cyclist, one of the 2 cyclists killed that morning.
What gave me strength to move forward through all this is to understand it wasn't just about me. All these people have all suffered. They all loved David. They all loved Karen.
Stephen explained how difficult all this has been on his family. Karen left behind 2 sons. It was just incredibly unexpected. He's just heartbroken.
She was a bundle of joy, energy, and they all miss her. As do I. But we're moving forward.
We're trying.
We're not forgetting, we're moving forward.
And that was a big theme from the sentencing, was moving forward. And there were so many mixed emotions in this that you've been following from the very beginning. Several cyclists also reminded the judge of Quintana-Lujan's actions that morning that forever changed their weekly ride, that he didn't try to help those injured cyclists after his vehicle hit them. He didn't even call 911. There's also frustration with the county attorney's office. We've discussed how their office said they simply didn't have enough. Yet we saw that the Goodyear municipal city attorney's office did have enough to proceed. Clay Wells, who was critically injured, and you've followed his recovery from really learning to walk again. He was critically injured that morning and addressed what happened.
If there were any misjustice in all of this proceeding, it took place downtown at the county attorney's office.
Yeah, and he actually said that he forgave the driver. He says that he believes that it was an accident, a tragic accident. He doesn't believe it was intentional, but again, he really has some anger and frustration with the county attorney's office for not acting. But what really struck me being inside court was David Quiro's widow and her message to the driver.
I want you to know that I forgive you, for I have made a choice to not add anger and vengeance to the already enormous amount of difficult emotions I have been experiencing.
So many mixed emotions in that one hearing, talking about the moving forward that these families are going through, and that's really their thought process, is to move forward and, each step forward and, trying not to take any steps back. And really that's what this was a sense anyway, because there will never be closure, but it's a small part of that. But some of these people have never spoken before publicly. Why did they do it now?
I think they really wanted the driver, they really wanted the judge to hear how this crash forever changed them. I think that they were in part hoping to hear from the driver to understand what had happened. There was an earlier hearing where he sort of apologized, but it was very brief. He kind of kept his head down. He didn't address them at all. But I think that they really felt that it was important for them to make their voice heard here. And there was that real frustration and sort of anger, like why he wouldn't call 911, why he wouldn't go to check on those injured cyclists. Because we know, according to that NTSB report, that he was taking video of the scene, he was calling FaceTiming his partner. Why weren't you doing something about these cyclists? And his attorney tried to address that and said, everyone handles stress, trauma differently, but it doesn't mean that it was intentional. It just means that he handled the situation differently. And that defense attorney also pointed out, hey, the county attorney's office said this was not a felony. So that's why we're here. And, kind of was encouraging folks to kind of try to push past this and not put all the blame on the driver.
Well, and they, as some of them have said, they believe that there is blame for the county attorney. So there are still so many questions, and a lot of questions still remain of never know really what happened. So Pedro Quintana-Lujan says this happened. The NTSB says there's no way. All of our testing shows his what now appear to be excuses had no way of happening and show no way of happening because, the truck has electronics that don't lie. You hook up, they hooked up a reader to it and just downloaded all the data. So, there's nothing that can be, changed about that, as what it is what it is. But we never really have a reason. And Pedro Quintana-Lujan never really explained that, because you saw him after court both times and there was no comment, no real apology or explanation.
No, he never said anything. And his defense attorney might have encouraged him to not say anything, which, could be a part of this. But we do know that he was partying on the night prior to the crash, that he was working that morning, headed to work at the time, that he admitted to smoking marijuana and drinking the night before. So we know NTSB said tiredness played a role in this, inattention played a role in this, but we'll never really get a sense of what happened in those 6 seconds, why he didn't slam on the brake, what was happening. They did look at his phone. They determined it wasn't distracted driving. That was another part of this. So he wasn't, to our knowledge, he wasn't texting someone, but the only person who will know what was happening in that pickup truck at the time of the crash is him.
And so in the end, the judge sentenced him to a year behind bars, 3 years of unsupervised probation, a $2,500 fine, quarterly drug testing. But the toll this has taken on the families, like the Quiros, is hard to put into words.
Before that day, we had a loving husband, father, brother, and friend. After that day, we have existed in a world of sorrow, grief, and trauma.
So what are the next steps in this case?
The next step is a restitution hearing, which will happen next month. So it's interesting. Misdemeanors, city court is so different from superior court. So in this situation, there's going to be restitution that he has to pay back. And we know that he has 4 kids. And he is the sole provider, is what he's told the court. And so the judge has to weigh that. And so the judge expressed interest in having him try to do some kind of work release while he spends this year behind bars. The situation is he doesn't go to prison, he goes to jail. And the jail is not set up to do work release because this is sort of a longer sentence. And so because of that, they decided to sort of put off and try to reach some agreement on how he might continue to work and then also serve his sentence. And there was a possibility even of an ankle monitor that the judge had mentioned, which, speaking to some families afterwards, they said, hey, a year really isn't long enough in our minds for this. A year where he could go home after work is just not good enough. And so, but some of these families still want to get some of their money back because, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on surgeries. One of these cyclists spoke out about how he can't work, how his home is now in foreclosure because of this, because he can't pay his bills. And so that restitution part is something that's important to some of these people.
And just to clarify, that is different from the $2,500 fine. This is separate.
Exactly. So they total up. So the $2,500 is just a fine that he pays the court. But this restitution is a different number, and it's basically what these folks, those injured, paid in medical bills. And so there is a lot of medical bills and a lot of money that he's going to owe. And we know that he wasn't even he didn't even have a car insurance at the time. So there's certain questions surrounding how much money he actually might have. We know the families have not really gotten any money up until this point. So that restitution is a big thing.
Well, and you bring up the monetary value, but there's much more than that. These families, some will not have family members coming back from that bike ride. Others have had their lives, forever changed due to the actions of one man and what happened on that bridge on that day.
Yeah, and that is a really important point. I think sometimes when I've covered the prior hearings, there's always been the cyclists who've come, but they haven't always wanted to talk. This hearing really sort of brought home the toll that this has taken on so many people. And even, the group is still around. They're still doing their rides. We want to point that out. But this has changed some of them. They don't go on the same route that they used to. They're more cautious in their riding. I mean, and these are cyclists who this is their passion, and it's, and some of those injured haven't been able to get back on a bike because their bodies will not allow it at this point.
And I'm sure for those who do, they think about that weekend every time they get back on.
Of course. It's just an awful situation.
Well, the restitution hearing is scheduled for next month. Many of the cyclists say they will be back in court for it, and so will we. And that will do it for this edition of the Arizona's Family Investigates podcast. For Amy Cutler, I'm Cody Lillich. Thanks for joining us.
The Arizona's Family Investigates podcast, hosted by Amy Cutler and produced by Cody Lillich, and a production of Arizona's Family 3 TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.